The most successful people in the world all have one thing in common. They've learned how to think big by developing a perspective of possibility. And the good news is, we all have the potential to apply the same strategies to achieve amazing things in our work and lives. Hi, I'm Rob Hartnett, and as your Chief Possibility Officer and host, I'm here to inspire you to become the star of your world as a person of possibility, through learning how people from all areas of life are thinking big and chasing down their dreams. And once again, we have an astounding guest. I don't know where I get them from, but they just keep coming along, and this one is unbelievable. Today I have an incredible guest, an author, a lawyer, a speaker, a consultant. I don't know, there's so much to him. He is totally one of these people that's definitely a person of possibility. Would you please welcome Matthew Lumsden? How are you, Matthew?
Very well. Thank you very much. Appreciate the very kind introduction.
Oh, no problem at all. Now, currently you're in your role. You're the principal of Shibui Advisory. But you and I go back, don't we, my friend? We go back.
Absolutely.
We go back into your unbelievable days, and I think you are one of the great, definitely one of the great clients of mine. No questions asked. But you're also an amazing sales leader and leader in general. Through your days at Vanguard. I mean, that must be going back, probably 9 years now. Maybe 9 years, probably coming
when
up.
We started, absolutely.
Early days when we
right
started.
back at the beginning.
Yeah. And I remember you challenged me, which I always loved about you and Vanguard, by the way. It was one of the great clients. And ladies and gentlemen, we used to have a 2-day workshop when I was working at Miller Hyman. And Matthew said, I kind of like the content, but can we do it in one? And I'm like, that's interesting. And the Miller Hyman guys I spoke to, and there was a gap on the end of the phone, and they were passed out at that point. And we came back, and I said, well, I reckon I can do it in one, because I was really up for the challenge. And we did it. I mean, we started at 7 a.m., I think, in Sydney, that first workshop. And what I really liked about what you did, you set the tone from the top. And I think from a leader, I've always admired that by you. And you set the tone from the top. And ladies and gentlemen, this was not a small ask. Matthew said the pre-reading is an entire book. And so, and to my amazement, I read it and went, wow, this will be interesting. To my amazement, Matthew's entire team read the book, and not only read it, came to with amazing questions. And I just think that was to me, that it was an example of your leadership and also the respect you carried within Vanguard. So all kudos to you, my friend. And so when you've moved away from Vanguard, you worked in a couple of startups, you did this crazy thing, which I want to get into, because when you told me about it, I went, God, you're amazing. This will be a test, though, when you moved away and you were working for a UK-based company, but you were doing it from Port Macquarie. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
And I think that led you to some epiphanies in life.
Yes.
And you rounded out.
Recognized how crazy I was. Yeah.
You were, but I had all faith in you. But you did become a mere mortal and said, hang on a second, this is tough. So few little iterations, but you've also basically decided to become an author, which I'm really excited about. And I know that you always had it in you. And the book's called Shibui, so we'll get a little photo later on, but you've got Shibui out. Tell me why Shibui. Tell me how you came to this point. Let's start there.
Oh, starting with the big questions.
Yeah.
I think I always had a book in me, and I've always obviously loved reading, as you know, and thrust that onto various team members over the years. And I think for me, my love for all things Japan started when I was 5 years old. And I went to a small Catholic primary school in Sydney, and they offered Japanese. And so I started to get exposed to the language and the culture and the history. And I think because it was just such a different set of ingredients, if you will, I just fell in love with everything about Japan. And I think as a small child, the mystique and the imagery associated with the samurai in particular was, very intriguing. And so I think over time, I've just read a lot about Japanese culture. I obviously lived in Japan when I went to Japan on exchange when I was 15, and I lived with the host family, went to a high school, Japanese high school, and then I went back to work. So I've kind of always topped up my interest in all things Japan. And so, as you rightly pointed out, my crazy endeavor to work for a fintech in London, albeit largely doing it from Australia, um, led to complete burnout. And I just sat back and reflected on what was most important to me in my life. And I think that started the basis for a book. And then I thought, well, how do I talk about various things that people might find interesting? And so I came up with the idea of talking about a cultural construct that is not familiar to most people. And even in Japan, very little has been written about Shibui. So I'm kind of excited that I spend a bit of time figuring out, well, which aspects of Shibui should I write about, and then start the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really glad you've also written it, and I'm quite fascinated. I was fascinated with your background and going. I didn't know. I knew you had worked in Japan and you had a passion for Japanese culture, but I
Yeah.
didn't know the real background. I didn't know from the 5 year old in primary school,
Mm, mm.
and then going over there with the host family. And you may not know this, but my cousin
Yeah.
Gina actually did a very similar thing, and she's
Oh, get
went
out.
went to Japan.
Yeah.
I think she went there at she must have been 16, 17,
Yeah.
and lived with a host family, studied law. She's actually a lawyer,
Oh, right.
and she works in financial services, and she's in
Oh,
London.
get out.
So
Very similar.
so there was quite a lot of connection for me when I was reading your story, and I know Gina will be listening to this. So hi Gina, and I hope you enjoy this with Matthew. And please
Absolutely. Hi,
feel free if
Gina.
there's anything he tries to put over me, you can please correct me. But no, she's great. I'm sure. But I was really, that's why I already had this connection with you when you were talking about it. Why don't you think Shibui's been written about much in Japan?
I think it's a concept that is deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. Um, but in many respects, maybe it's something that people kind of just know. I often think about it in the context of when you try and teach somebody English or, your own mother tongue.
Right.
And, I've got young kids, and my 5-year-old in particular is at the moment just learning various aspects of the language. And she'll ask, well, why is it pronounced that way? Or why is it spelt that way? And I feel really inadequate as a parent because you end up saying, it's just because it is. And so I think in some respects, Shibui is a bit like that. So there was this shogun back in the 16th century, Yoshimasa, Ashikaga Yoshimasa. And he essentially is known in history as possibly the worst shogun in Japanese history. And Donald Keene, who was an esteemed American academic that spent a lot of time understanding the intricacies of Japanese culture and ended up living there for most of his life. He wrote a book specifically about Yoshimasa, the Silver Pavilion in Kyoto, and the impact that he had on the cultural life of Japan. And he, in many respects, set the stage for what is Shibui, what aesthetically is considered Shibui. And I think this is the other twist about Shibui. It comes from the aesthetic world. So it's very much tied to the tea ceremony, ikebana, pottery, ceramics. And I've tried to then apply it to life and business just to make it, even more I guess, complicated in some respects, but um, that was kind of the background. And I think Soetsu Yanagi, just to finish answering your question,
Mm,
he led the Minge movement, or the crafts, the folk craft
right.
movement in Japan. So from kind of the early 1900s, post-war, he then established um, the Japan Folk Craft Museum in Tokyo, and there's a sister one in Seoul, which actually preceded the one in Tokyo. Anyway, he's probably one of the few Japanese people that has written about Shibui in English. And I used a research trip to Japan to go to the museum. I write about that in the book,
Yes, yes, I
and
remember that. Yeah.
you know, he had an incredible perspective on what was considered Shibui and also what was considered beautiful. And he had a view that it came from everyday people. It didn't come from machines or automation. So yeah, lots of really great nuggets from his books and his perspective and collection.
And so as you apply it to business, what were is this where you brought in if I get this right, the Persimmon principles? Did you bring those
Yeah,
in bit through?
Persimmon
So
Principles.
let's talk
Yeah.
about the Persimmon principles then and how you connected the two.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no literal translation for Shibui, but essentially it means a refined simplicity.
Yes.
Um, and, you know, for a concept that has simplicity at its core, ironically, it's quite complicated to unpack. And so I was talking to my dad about all of the components, and I was going to talk about simplicity and subtlety and imperfection and impermanence. And he said, well, didn't you tell me that uh, there's a meaning that's tied to a persimmon? So an unripened persimmon
Yeah.
uh, has an astringent taste. And so that in Japanese is called shibugaki. So there is a literal connection to persimmons.
Right.
Hopefully I didn't extend the connection too far, but I then wanted to use, the four leaves on top of a persimmon
Mm.
to then essentially summarize what Shibui means, essentially to me, an outsider looking in. And I use simplicity, subtlety, imperfection, and impermanence as the categories for further conversation about Shibui and how it applies to life and how it applies to business. And I leave the reader with prompts because
Mm.
I think some of the most effective and enjoyable business books that I've read in my life have never really told me what to do. They've always just provided me with a framework because, I kind of believe, one, that books find you. The right book finds you at the right time, oddly enough.
Yes.
And then secondly, it allows you to then figure out, okay, at this time, these are the things that I'm thinking about either in my life or in business or with my team or my partner. And I'll then take what I want from the book and then apply it. And I think that's what I hope to do with writing about Shibui.
It's a really interesting concept, and it just hit me in a couple of ways. The book's timing was quite amazing. My youngest son, who I don't think about, which is Lockie, he's doing
Yeah.
his master's in architecture. And so
Okay.
he's just finished an amazing design. When you're doing your master's, you're basically close to commercial, when he's actually working on commercial work. But
Yeah.
the elegant simplicity, the
Mm.
impermanence, the
Yeah.
subtlety, and what's really interesting about some of the work he's doing, and he's using repurposed furniture, and he's looking at how do you
Right.
repurpose everything? How do you get
Yep.
stuff off the street and put it into an apartment building? And so we're
Mm.
repurposing as much as we can.
Yep.
And as I look at that, the elegant simplicity has gone behind, but there's the complexity behind elegant simplicity is
Yes.
something
Yeah.
that people often don't appreciate.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
see it in I see it in yacht design. Like if you actually look at
Yeah.
the most successful yachts, easy to
Mm,
sail, easy to do, the
mm,
complexity and the thinking that we're into, the simplicity,
yeah.
it's fascinating when you lift the lid. I see it in his architecture.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
most when you look at it as a first person, you go, "Oh my God, the layout's so simple. It's so easy. The sun comes in
Yeah.
here." But the thinking behind that it enables you to peel back. And there were so many
Exactly.
things on the four that you just mentioned: simplicity, the subtlety, the impermanence, imperfection. And I think
Mm,
imperfection's a really strong one in terms of
yeah.
don't let perfection get in the way of progress.
Yes.
That's we've all heard that, and that it
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense. So I actually see. Um, Shibui in so many different forms.
Yeah.
And more so after I read your book, I started to see more of it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sort of that refined or elegant simplicity, difficult to do, but you know
Yeah.
when you see it.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear that that's the impact that it's had. Because I think about if we go back to Soetsu Yanagi, I tried to when I entered the Japan Folkcraft Museum to put myself in his shoes and see the collection through his eyes
Right.
and try and understand, right, this was his concept of Shibui. And so, he was a huge supporter of Okinawan linen and dyeing techniques. And so you notice in the rooms upstairs that the curtains are made out of that material. You notice the very simple but sturdy wooden bookcases that house a lot of these beautiful ceramic collections. You notice the really large but cool stone tiles at the base of the building as you walk in. I went during summer, and summer in Tokyo, for those that have been, is incredibly humid and hot. And so the moment you walk in, to your point about like reuse, but also sustainability, there's no air conditioning,
Mm.
but it was cool.
Right.
And so I think there are so many things that we overcomplicate in the modern world. And so for me, if if anybody takes anything from the book, it's try not to go down that path. Like I think even in terms of the business career that I've had and even the clients that I work with now, we try and then pair it back to, okay, well, what is the core problem that we are trying to solve here?
Yes.
Because I think there are so many instances, and you'll see this in your world as well, where there's an attempt, one, to do too much, and two, there's an attempt to overcomplicate stuff that doesn't need to be overcomplicated.
100%. I think that's more and more I do that. You're exactly right in my world to literally ask the question. Okay, let me get back to that. I know what you're looking for, and sometimes it'll even be um, quite prescriptive. I remember quite a large global rollout I did a few years back. Interesting with a large Korean telco when we worked hard to work out which who it was.
Right.
And they originally came to us with the solution. It was
Yeah.
our solution, and you could have easily gone, no problem, let's do it.
Yeah.
We would have all made money, and it would have been great. It wouldn't have got them
Mm,
where what they wanted though, and so
mm,
we
mm.
literally had to pare it back to go, actually, what are you trying to solve here? Like, thank you for recognizing our brand. Great research. Well done. However, you don't know what we know, i.e., we think that's not the right solution to you because we actually have this other stuff that you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need to know what is, we really peel it back. And the reality of the situation was the people we were talking to didn't know the why. They'd
Mm,
just been asked to go and get this. And
yeah.
so it literally took quite a bit of an investment on my part and others. What I mean by that is 2 trips to Seoul
Mm,
uh,
mm.
to meet with people 3 or 4 layers above my pay grade
Yeah.
to actually get FaceTime with them to actually find out the problem. And when we got to the nub of the problem,
Yeah.
their solution wasn't right, would never have worked.
Mm,
And we actually had some good, solid debate. It ended up going from what was something they wanted to do over a weekend to being a 3-year engagement at
wow.
10 times what they thought they were going to put in. the price. But what they were trying to solve was something of a magnitude of 100x, 1000x was actually their problem.
Yeah.
And so when you peel it back to that simplicity, actually, what are you trying to solve here? Because we could do a lot of activity. Activity doesn't mean solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feels good,
Yeah.
but you haven't got to the core of it. And I think I really like that's why I really like this book. I think if you get back to what are you trying to solve here, like why are we talking,
Yes.
and so let's really get to that. Let's have that conversation beforehand. I think that's the elegance of it, to come back and say, okay, I see what you're doing. Maybe that's impossible. Maybe it's possible. Um, when should we do it? And you have that kind of robust debate. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
tell
I
me,
think
go
about
on.
the business context. I think about the
Mm,
life context, right?
yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
I think when you are so busy and you're doing lots of things, so the activity is up, but you're not necessarily then having the time to sit back and go, well, actually, is this leading to my goals being achieved? So, and I know that it sounds really big and scary, but I often try and get people to a point to ask themselves, well, why have you been put on this planet? What is your purpose? What's your mission? What's your why? Whatever the question is, or the what's your dream, the Simon Squibb question. I think they're all really good questions. And if we take the time to sit down and go, well, you know what? This is actually why I've been put on this planet, and then go about creating an action plan that fits into that. And the same goes for business, right?
Mhm.
Like if
Same.
your mission and your vision and your values are all aligned, that's why I happily spent 13 years of my life at Vanguard, because those three things, core components of any business,
Mm,
were all really clear.
yes.
And so I think when those things are in place, like the fundamental building blocks of life and a business, when they're all clear, then it's actually really easy to go, oh, that's not aligned with the business objectives. So let's not do that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so little people do it. So there's a couple of things that come to my mind as I spoke through that. A lot of times people though will go, I don't know why I've been put on this planet. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
unsure and I'm super busy.
yeah,
And what I say to people is action precedes passion, right? And so
yeah.
sometimes you don't know unless you try something out. And you may
Mm,
also answer that question and go, I know why I've been put here. It's because of this. And I say, well,
yeah,
what have you done about it? Well, nothing
yeah,
yet. And I go, don't go do something, because you may find out you weren't put here for that particular reason, and you've had this big dream in your mind, and it might not be right. And I think
yeah,
I've just actually had this beautiful red carpet moment. I didn't do it, unfortunately, but I saw it with Tom Cruise, who's doing the
yeah.
whole Mission Impossible thing. But he said a really interesting point. They said, what do you do when what are you doing these big tasks? What do you do? And he
Mm,
really answered it well. He said, I write them down, and
mm,
I'm not afraid to be afraid.
yeah,
But the immediate thing I do is get out of my own head.
yeah,
I take
yeah,
action, and
yeah,
I ring somebody, I call somebody, I do something, and I find out if I stay in my own head, it'll never happen, and I'll walk away. But I'm not afraid to be afraid, and I'm not afraid not to know, and I'm not afraid to say to any of my team, I don't know how we're going to do this, and I don't know whether you know this, but the reason why they've got Dead Reckoning 1 and 2, is because at the end of Dead Reckoning 1, what they wanted to do in the submarine sequence is they hadn't invented the apparatus to do it.
all
So
right.
that's what they did at part two. It took them 15 months to do the underwater scenes to invent an apparatus because of what they wanted to do. So the answer was, we
That's
don't know how
awesome.
to film it. We're going to need to do the last movie in two parts. And if you look back, he explains it quite well. But getting
That's
out of
awesome.
your own head, so taking action, I think, in the
Yeah,
direction
yeah,
is important. That's the first one. The second one I really like on the business side, and I did a workshop with a company recently,
yeah,
and they had their values up. And I said, you know what? Can I just challenge you on the values? A couple of them I don't understand.
yeah,
Now maybe I'm not that smart, but I didn't quite get them. And I think if values aren't easy to understand, then
yeah.
you've got to question that.
Mm,
And so we did this values exercise, and a number of their personal values were not
yeah,
aligned to their company values.
yeah,
Right?
right.
This is an LT, right? And then one of the guys in the LT said, Look, I don't think that really matters. We have our own personal values and we have company values. And I just let
Mm,
it hang, which is hard for me, as you know.
yes,
But I've learned something, Matthew. I let it hang. And one of the other team members said, hang on a second, did we not say that personal relationships are what's going to differentiate us and a core to our business? They went,
yes,
yeah, personal relationships are everything. He said, well, if personal relationships are everything, how on earth can we have personal values different than our company values?
completely right.
And then there
Yeah,
was a silence. And I went, oh, God, that's right. Okay, back to work.
yeah,
And they got them
yeah,
aligned, but it was a really interesting debate with people who respected each other, which was really great. So they felt there was definitely
absolutely.
psychological safety, and they could say, you know what, we're misaligned here. And
Yeah,
they just
yeah,
essentially what they did was re-script what they had, so it
yeah,
was just easier to get it, and they were all aligned, so they felt very comfortable going forth into the market. Once again,
yeah.
simplicity, but sometimes there's a little bit of complexity behind the simplicity.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right, you've got to have the tough conversations. And so it's not just a matter of getting alignment, it's also having the courage to broach what could be uh, a robust discussion. And then all saying, okay, yep, we've had the debate, we've all put our views forward, and we've now agreed this is the path forward, no disagreement. Let's get this done.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fantastic. Now let's talk about the book a little more. I That we're going to talk about the book. It's a question, a big question. You know where I'm coming from with this. You decided
Backwards.
to do. You
Why?
wrote the book backwards. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you do get the book Shibui, it is written backwards. Now, I want Matthew to take us through why. I mean, I know why, but take us through why you decided to write it backwards. So it starts at the back and goes all the way forward,
It
right? So,
does. Yeah. And I think this is one of those things, it's about perspective. So if you go to a Japanese bookstore, every book starts from the back and finishes at the front, right?
that was great. I did not know that, first of all. So that was fantastic, and you decided to do it that way, which I really applaud you for.
Yeah.
Um, was that the main reason? Just because that's how
Well,
it's really
and
been done?
I think as a result, like I wanted people to think differently.
Yeah.
So, yes, typically an English book is not written from the back to the front, but I wanted people to think about their life and about their business differently. Well, if I want to shock somebody out of the status quo thinking or the way things that have always been done, I actually want them to go, what do you mean I have to read this from the back? Why are you thanking the people that helped you get this book done right at the beginning of the book? Like, and I've had a couple of people um, say that it took them a while, even though they knew that you
Yes.
started from the back, and they constantly kept checking themselves. But I actually that's success in my mind because it started a process where people, one, may not have been aware that there are other parts in the world. I know Asia in particular, but also many other parts in the Arab world,
Mm,
Muslim world
yes.
read that way too. So that was one. And then two, it's a great conversation because, if I'm going in and I'm sitting down with a fifth generation manufacturing business and they've always done it a certain way, well, I say, well, there are other ways that you could do this, and there might be simpler, more cost-effective ways using technology or using your people in a different way to get different outcomes. So yeah, no, I think it was worth the pain that I put everybody through to get it to the point where it was back to front.
And I have to ask you a question. How does you go with the printers? 'Cause it's a lovely printed book. It's a hard copy and
Yes,
hard copy, I
yes.
should say, and it's really well printed. Did your printers firstly go, what the? And have you sent us the wrong script? Or how did that go?
To their credit, they were really good, and you know, as you've experienced firsthand, I like to push the envelope on what's possible. So I actually wanted a slightly different finish. So I didn't want to have a dust jacket,
Mm,
and so I wanted the persimmon printed on foil on cloth.
Right.
And after, various back and forth discussions, they ultimately said, look, it's not going to end up with the quality finish that you're after. So then they suggested this Arlen finish, which
Mm,
actually has come up really nicely.
mm.
So all of the bookshops that I've spoken to and stocked the book with, they love the finish, and they love the vibrancy of the orange of the persimmon on the back of the white. And that's also kind of in keeping with Shibui, right?
Yes.
But yeah, no, I think um, the designer was also really accommodating and understood. So like right from the get-go, everybody that I worked with was on the same page, and I think that helped. But it certainly would have been easier if I'd just done what everybody else did.
No, I'm glad you pushed it because I think it's a really good. But that does you do have to remind yourself when you're reading it. Sometimes if I pick it up, or I haven't like a couple of days went by, and I pick it up again and go, now am I
Yeah,
going that page first or that one? But that's even a good thing because it gets you in the moment of the
yeah,
book. The other thing I liked about starting at the end was something that you and I've done in business together. Is we've also decided, well, what do we want to get out of this meeting? What do we want to get out of this strategy? Where
mm,
do we let's start. Let's begin at the end. Let's
yes,
what does success look like? What does a good meeting look like? What does a good strategy look like? What's a good outcome for the client? If you
yeah,
think about that, well, that's exactly
mm,
what you've done here. You've gone, let's start here and let's go
yeah,
backwards. So I really like that consistency of framework. Question I had for you with when you were at Vanguard, when you were, as you said, the principles were aligned. It was a great organisation for the 13 years you were there because it was that total
yeah.
alignment. Did you bring any of Shibui into your leadership at Vanguard, even though you might not have called it Shibui?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that I now have this really neat label, but at the time I certainly didn't recognize it. I think if I take the impermanence element of Shibui, so nothing lasts forever. I think there's probably two key facets of that I applied both, when I was a leader of leaders at Vanguard, but also in other roles where I've led teams or people. So one is about succession planning and also um, setting other people up for success. I think Richard Branson put it well, that his first job whenever he's the CEO of a company is to find his replacement. And so I've always been a really firm believer in finding your successor early and giving them every opportunity to experience what it is like to do the job that you're doing,
Mm,
so that it's not a shock when you're asking them to step up. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of leaders make. It's like, well, no, this is my seat, so now I've got to protect the seat. Well,
yes,
no, you've got to give yourself the opportunity to do other things and provide the opportunity for others to step up. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think the other really important one, and this kind of is innate in my personality. So I can never really sit in any circumstance, whether it be sitting in a coffee shop and seeing things being done inefficiently or ineffectively, or in a business, a broader business context. So it's like, how do you continually improve and adapt to the changing needs of your customers or the market? And so I think if you have this concept in your mind that nothing lasts forever, um, you're always thinking, okay, well, what's next? And you're never ever resting on your laurels. And to Vanguard's credit, I think that was something that was built into the culture. So even though we got bigger and bigger and there were trillions and trillions of dollars being managed, I think the leadership team was always very good at reminding everybody that, hey, hang on, we're still the scrappy um, competitor. And so we don't want larger competitors to eat our lunch, or we don't want even smaller competitors to think that we're in any way complacent. So I think they're probably the two aspects that I applied.
yeah, I really like that one too. There's a couple of ones that I'm using in here. I think the way Google does it, Because some
Hmm.
people go, yeah, I get the concept, but I don't know how to do it. And if you don't have an innate um, ability or that innate drive inside you, like
Yeah.
I do or you do,
Yeah.
I think the Google way I thought was quite good. And so theirs is this principle of 70-20-10,
Mm.
which is basically, at all times it's 70% working on core, 20% working on stuff adjacent to core, and 10% on off the reservation,
Yeah.
out there ideas. And if you actually follow that philosophy, I've seen it 80-20 as well. 80-20 works well, but
Yeah.
70-20-10 is a really interesting one on a more complex business. You
Yeah.
basically you make it part of the DNA of the business.
Mm.
Are we truly, or have we got a little bit loose and forgotten about the 10%? What are we doing on
Yeah.
that 10%?
Yeah.
We've got teams on that. And I
Yeah.
think, and that also pair that with your succession planning one, which I love. And I totally agree with you. I mean, it's so rare for me when I ask the question, so tell me about your emerging leaders program.
Mm.
And I get, what?
Silence.
We've got a leadership program. No. I said, how's your emerging leaders program? Your high
Yeah.
page, your high potentials.
Yeah.
What are you doing about that? And so often it's just like it's crickets.
Yeah.
It's crickets, and then they go, God, that makes so much sense. Like everyone's
Yeah.
so caught up on things. It's interesting. Question for you for Shibui and AI. Any thoughts?
Yeah. That's a tricky one. Look, as you can see from behind me, I am a traditionalist in the sense that I still read books in paper. I do occasionally listen to an audio book if I've got a long drive. Um, but I think on AI, so if we pick up on the imperfection element of Shibui,
Mm,
uh, it is strongly grounded in humans being involved in the process, right? So a teacup is actually beautiful if it has the imperfections of somebody's fingers around the bowl.
mm, yes.
Um, it's not considered any less beautiful because of those imperfections. And I think there are many aspects where highly manufactured processes lead to a perfect teacup, but it's not necessarily considered shibui.
Yes.
And so, like, my sense on the AI thing is it's a bit like anything in life that everything's on a spectrum. And to me, it's a bit like the debate that we had around remote working. There was those that said everybody had to go back to the office, and then there's those that said, oh, all remote is fine, nothing in between. And we settle on something in between, right?
Mm,
And so I think with AI, we've got two very similar positions. Those that are saying it's going to save everything, save our future generations, save the world. And then there's people that say it's the worst thing that we could ever have invented. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, but I think we've got to be careful. I I reflect on the research trip that I did to Tokyo and Kyoto for Shibui, and I spent many a day in Kyoto walking around temples, and many were, you know, uh, far away from the center of town. And on those walks, largely alone, I contemplated so many aspects of Shibui from a historical and cultural perspective, but also spiritual. And I think, talking about I don't even think we've got a good handle on our own brains as human beings. I don't think we've really scratched the surface in terms of the research. So I kind of feel a little uncomfortable venturing down a path where we're embracing artificial intelligence when we haven't necessarily, in my view, got a full handle on human intelligence.
such a great point. I really like that point. I think there's also there's a couple of angles on it as well, which from a business perspective, think I think there's some connections to Shibui, and one was I heard from a conference just the other week that Matt Coman at
Hmm.
CBA
Yep.
made the point. He said, this is the quote, I'll try and get it right,
Yep.
which is every task, every person, every day, let's consider whether that can be done with AI or not.
Yep.
I like the simplicity of that because
Mm.
there is a lot of, again, is there a place for it, which is really the question.
Yep.
And the CEO, I've forgotten his name now, he's the CEO of Shopify,
Yep.
came out with a similar one and said, before you ask me for any resources, can I AI do it?
Yeah.
And again, it's not saying, and there was, and again, of course, that quote was taken out of context. To your point, it was like, oh, he's trying to replace
Yeah.
everybody. Well, no, he
Yeah.
actually wasn't. He was just simply
Yeah.
saying, at the speed it's evolving, can we focus our human intelligence
Yeah.
in a place where human intelligence is more warranted, as
Yeah.
opposed to. So I think the spectrum's a nice one to look at it, but I think we'll get down that path because there's no question there's some things that I use it for. I'm sure you use it for. And what's really fascinating, no one's really picked up in the media, but my colleague Ross Cameron, who does a lot of research in small business, he runs a small
Hmm.
business research company, is finding
Yeah.
the take up of AI in small businesses unbelievably high, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because
Well,
you've got costs and you've got people and so at a small business level, it's
mm,
really high and it makes complete sense why it's like that. But no one's really picked that up in the media yet. So it's an interesting space. But I actually do
I
think
agree.
there's some connections to Shibui with it. And whereas
Yeah.
most people would say, oh, there's not, it's more complex, it's more this. Well, actually, if you go back to your principles, the
Yes.
four you mentioned, and you stay
Yeah.
with those four, I think there's more connection, but only time will tell.
Yeah.
Daily habits for Shibui. What can we do? What can people do to introduce Shibui and the principles into their daily lives more?
Yeah. I think on that front, um, there's quite a lot actually. So if you go through each of the components, there's questions that I ask the reader
Mm,
that will lead to people thinking through, well, hang on, how can I incorporate this into my daily life? And there's really simple ways. So I kind of think about that comment that Matt Common had made around the use of AI. If we can use technology to make our lives easier and better, and I think most importantly from that, we can get more human qualities. So if your doctor is spending more time with you, empathizing with your situation, or if it's your financial planner that's sitting down with you and helping you discover your why, you know, they're uniquely human things. And so I think about it in the context of daily rituals like post-COVID, never really felt like I needed to get out and have a walk or anything like that. But COVID certainly left that mark on me and our family in that every day I have to get out. And I'm very fortunate to live close to the beach, so I always go to the beach. And that for me is a daily ritual that feels very Shibui because it's a simple thing I can do, but it has a massive impact and huge benefits to mental health. The other things, and this kind of forces you to change your mindset. So a bit like reading a book from back to front. So mundane tasks. So ironing school uniforms for the kids or washing the dishes, rather than thinking of them as chores, use it as an opportunity to almost treat it as a meditation
mm,
and don't think about anything else, right? So there's a quote that I use in the book about washing up, just think about washing up. And it's I know it sounds really simple and stupid in some respects, but it is incredibly powerful. And so for me, like, and I know you're the same, how do you create a new habit? It has to be simple and
yes,
you have to repeat it over and over again. And if you don't do it really early on, the likelihood is that you won't change your habits.
Yeah.
And so they're, in my mind, the simple things that I take from Shibui that I do and enjoy as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one and a great one to think about. Just enjoying that, but also taking the time to really enjoy the moment. I mean, that's something
Mm.
that is,
Yep.
it sounds easy, but it's really hard to do. And I was doing some sailing, which I hadn't done for a long time because of an injury, but I was out there sailing on the weekend and I just really enjoyed the moment. I wasn't thinking too much about the trim or my arm or the issue at hand. I actually was like, God, this is actually a really nice day. And I'm actually really enjoying being present
Yes.
right
Yeah.
now.
It's massive.
It's if you
It's
can do
massive.
it, and if you can do it on it, if you can make it a habit to do that, try and get a bit of
Yeah.
joy out of
Yeah.
the everyday thing you're doing. It is
Yeah.
actually a big shift. And I know that might seem crazy for some people, but but the great thing about it, as you said, you can apply this to whoever you are. What are you doing? You're washing up, doing the ironing, you're
Yeah.
going for you're
Yeah.
cycling, going for a run, you're walking the dog. And one of my good friends says that when he's walking his dog, he never wears his AirPods or anything like that
Yeah.
because that's his dog's time.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
says, I want to be at one with my dog. It's unfair to him that I put in my headphones. His dog goes, oh, good on you. I was going to have a
Just
chat,
ignore him. Yeah.
And so he
Yeah.
goes, it's my dog's
Absolutely.
time. And I love that
Yeah.
thinking because that's the kind of example, isn't it? That we
Yeah.
take the moment to be the person you're with or the animal you're with
Completely.
to really get the joy out of it. Now, tell me, how can people find Shibui? So where is it? Is it, what's a
Yes, so
bookstore
they can get
online?
it
Tell us
directly
that.
from my website. So Shibui is Shibui
Yep.
advisory .com. Or there's three great independent bookstores that have kindly added it to their shelves. So Avenue Books in Melbourne, Betty Loves Books in Newcastle, and Bookface in Port Macquarie. I'm having discussions with some other bookstores as well, but they're for the moment available as at the.
Okay. And we find out more about you. So you're on LinkedIn. We can find out for Matthew
Yeah, I'm on
Lumsden's on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yeah, there's a bit more information on the website, and just direct message me, and if you're interested in becoming and spending some time with your team or speaking at an event, I'm more than happy to do so. And I think this is this book um, distills a lot of lessons from a corporate life, but also me being in business for myself and working with smaller, medium-sized businesses where, interestingly enough, a lot of the lessons apply across the board. And to your point about, small businesses using AI, I mean, the ability for small businesses to benefit from technology, but also changes in the way they think about their business is huge. And I personally have found it incredibly rewarding being able to sit down with owners of a business, look at what they're doing, and then provide some advice that then gets very quickly implemented so that they can see the
Yeah.
results.
That's the
And
difference, isn't it? It's the ability that they can execute so quickly on your
that's
advice,
really
which is
rewarding.
really
Yeah,
rewarding, isn't it? When that can happen. So yeah, I
absolutely.
totally agree. I think you've been absolute asset to any business, and I love the book. And I think the book can easily blow out to an easy 2 day, retreat workshop or a keynote. It's got so much in it, and you've got so much experience both from the big, large corporate global businesses, and
Yeah.
also right down to the small to medium. So Matthew, you've been fantastic
Rob.
to catch up again. It's been
No, it's
too long
been great.
between catch ups,
Yes, thank you.
but really enjoyed it, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Glad you liked it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. You can contact me at rob@robhartnett.com or my website, robhartnett.com, or on LinkedIn. Remember to check out the previous seasons and episodes of the podcast and the show notes for more details on this episode's guest. For more inspiration, remember to check out the It's All Possibility playlist on Spotify, which contains a collection of upbeat, positive music I use for inspiration in my live performances. Until next time, live with passion and a perspective of possibility.